Jimmy Dore. Welcome to Dad Saves America, man.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
So I went to your show last night, and when your Mike said, "Hey, you can come by the show today," I was super pumped because I have been watching you at least since the start of COVID.
Oh,
And the
okay.
thing that's so interesting to me, and this is where I want to kind of start our conversation, is you are a comedian. You came up through sort of progressive politics. I'm like a right winger, libertarian oriented, and yet I love watching your stuff. And I feel like that combo is part of this weird political realignment that's taken place. Like I know like half your audience is probably people more like me. And, so how do you think about what's happening with the
Well,
realignment that's going on?
I'll just say this. I think that uh, Democrats and people who I considered or consider themselves liberal, the liberal class has become illiberal, right? They've abandoned what it means to be a liberal. Like I always, I sometimes make a joke in my act about, I'm for freedom of speech. I'm against censorship. I'm for bodily autonomy. I'm for I'm pro-choice, I'm anti-war, and, that makes me a right winger now.
Yeah.
That's what it's amazing, right? And, the liberals are rabid censorship for censorship. They're completely pro-war, right? They've been completely hoodwinked by the propaganda about Putin and Russia, and they don't know. That's the thing about Americans, they're the most propagandized people in the world, and they have no idea. Right, people in China know when they're being propagandized, right? And people in the old Soviet Union knew when they were being people in America think like, "What? I don't well, I'm just watching the news." Even though Chomsky wrote Manufacturing Consent and, 30 years ago, they still think their consent is not being manufactured, which it is. It's amazing to me. So anyway, the realignment, I mean, look at the people there's a lot of Democrats surrounding. Trump used to be consider himself a Democrat. Matt Taibbi, Elon Musk, right? I'm pretty sure he voted for Joe Biden, right? Let's see, who Tulsi Gabbard was the vice chair of the Democratic National Committee. So it's there definitely is, and I subscribe to what I'm more on I know there's a lot of people who are actual lefties who are hypercritical of Donald Trump and Elon Musk and Kash Patel. And I'm like, yeah, I have big disagreements with Trump and Cash and Pam Bondi and Tulsi and RFK, but I also have lots of agreements with them, right? So I think you got to be able to, it doesn't, people are always talking about, oh, you think Elon's intentions are, with doing Doge. And I'm like, it doesn't matter what his intentions are. It only matter in politics. It only matters what the outcome is. It only, we'll know them by their fruits. Like, what did they do? It's like, I say, it didn't matter if Lincoln freed the slaves because he thought it was going to help him get laid. It didn't matter what his intention was. It mattered what the outcome was. That's all that matters. That's what they call making legislation, making sausage. And you don't want to see how it's done. It only matters what the outcome is. So I'm more in line with I know Chris Hedges, who I respect a lot, is very down on everything that's happening, and he just thinks that they're all just a criminal enterprise and they're grifting and they're collapsing in on themselves. And I'm like, I actually see them stopping the Ukraine war, telling Europe, you're on your own. We're not going to be there to protect you. Got do your own thing militarily. And that excites me. I like that they're purging the deep state. It's like they're getting rid of it's like a revolution against the neocons. That's what it feels like to me. And again, we'll have to see how it plays out. Now, his Achilles heel, and it's shared by everybody in his cabinet, is Israel Palestine. That's from my point of view. And now his solution is not a solution, but other people say, well, yeah, that's just him negotiating, doing art of the deal. He wants to move all the Palestinians out. That's just it. I'm like, okay, I don't know what the deal is he wants then, but anyway, so um, I'm excited in a lot of ways, and I think there is a realignment happening for sure. I think the fact that Donald Trump is a Republican just is kind of happenstance. You know, um, his rhetoric around immigration was shared by every Democrat since Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton was used to rail against illegal immigrants, saying they come here and take our jobs and they come here and use our services. Hillary Clinton said they have to learn English, they have to pay a big fine, they have to all they're all the same thing with Barack Obama. But then when Donald Trump got the nomination, I think that they had to figure out a way to separate themselves from him, right? Because they're a party of Wall Street, the Democrats, then they said they're not a party of workers, and they knew that, so they had to, "Oh, we'll paint him as a racist, and we'll paint him as a traitor to our country." And so now all the things that, they used to say about it, I mean, he's a little more bombastic about his immigration, but the message is almost kinda exactly the same. And so that's why 45% of Hispanics voted for him, so
And I think 55 for 40, 55, 54% of male has like Latinos.
Oh,
It
really?
was so it's like a majority of Latino men, as I understand it, which was that's kind of the first time in like since World War II, probably, that a Republican got a majority of like a large minority vote like that, I think.
Yeah, I mean, they say his numbers didn't go up with African Americans from the last time, but I think it was over 20%, which is still kind of amazing for a Republican, any Republican, and especially a guy who they painted as a racist.
Okay, I'll keep this quick. Be sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so that you won't miss more Dad Saves America as our videos come out each week. And it also really helps us because when we reach out to guests, they look at how many subscribers there are to decide if they want to come on and share their ideas. So please subscribe to the channel. It really helps us out. And thanks for watching. Now, back to the show.
It's one of these things where right before you showed up, I saw there was a senator from, I think, Missouri calling calling Elon Musk a dick on Twitter.
Yeah,
And the thing that was so funny to me is that we just did a video about the 60 Minutes piece where Germany is now arresting people
yeah,
for exactly that. There was actually a part
you
of the
can't
story
insult.
he was a politician who was called a Pimmel, and they went after the person that did it. And I have a feeling that same senator likes those laws. So why do you think that that's happened? Why has the political left in America like turned on free speech? That's such a strange like transformation.
Well, they just, there's an old saying, you scratch a liberal and underneath is a fascist, right? You've heard that, right? And I never really understood that, but I get it now. Especially during COVID. Like I said, they used to say I'm pro-choice. You don't hear them saying that much anymore. Now they say they're pro-abortion, which is weird. I have met some people who are pro-abortion, but it's a weird thing to be pro about. Like, I'm pro-choice, but they can't say pro-choice anymore because they were for mandating the COVID vaccine, which is not, you don't get a choice. Your choice is, you don't have a job and you can't travel. That's your choice.
My body, my choice with an asterisk.
Yeah, that's right. Except when it comes to this vaccine that's not a vaccine, that doesn't do what they said it did, and the fact. And anyway, so the Democrats became authoritarian, and now it's funny. I was watching that 60 Minutes thing about Germany, and they're saying that they're trying to they're censoring speech that would create people to engage in extremism and they're right-wing extremism, right? And I'm like, well, what do you call what you're doing? What you're doing right now is putting people in prison for speech. You're putting people in prison for protesting a genocide that's happening in Gaza. You're putting people, and at the same time, you're funding literal Nazis in Ukraine. You're the extreme right. The people who consider themselves liberals and lefts, they're the extreme right. They're look at what they're doing. They're putting people. I mean, censorship is the hallmark of dictators, right? And authoritarians and fascists. And they look at it like it's the Christian thing to do. And I don't know if they'll ever see the light on that. They just think that you have to protect people, marginalized groups from hate speech. They do it. I mean, every dictator, when they censor and keep outside information, they always say, well, we're doing it for your own good. They say, oh, we have to protect minority groups and the marginalized groups, and we have hate speech. And like I said last night, people who want to police hate speech are people who just hate speech.
One of the things that's it's just so, it should have been obvious that the problem with this is who defines hate speech, and it ends up
course.
the majority.
That's right.
So the entire premise of the First Amendment was always protection of minority rights. Like
That's
that
right.
was a fundamental thing. Like you don't have Martin Luther King, you don't have the civil rights movement if you don't have protection of those voices, because that was the minority voice. It's obvious. It's easy to be in the majority, right? So how does that? Maybe this is the same question asking again. It's just shocking to me that that lesson has gotten lost.
It's shock. Believe me, every day I wake up and I'm flummoxed. I can't believe that the people I've known all my life are now pro censorship. I couldn't believe people I knew all my life were pro mandates of experimental medical treatments. And they had the most ridiculous reasons to back it up. And they don't know. They don't know anything about COVID. It's like they went out of their way not to know anything about the vaccines, about the adverse events, the frequency, about if it stops transmission or contraction, or if it wasn't made as a bioweapon. They don't know anything. They don't know anything about natural immunity, herd immunity. They didn't know anything about that. There was no science behind any of the lockdowns, any of the masks. There's no science behind any of it. They didn't, and they don't care. That's the thing. Like, I keep waiting for, at some point they're going to go, hey, we were lied to. That's not right. I feel insulted. I feel violated. That they don't feel insulted. They don't feel violated. They don't even think about it. Now they just say, "Oh, COVID's over." That's what they say.
I saw recently a clip. It was named Deborah Burks, the
Yeah.
saying like, "Well, we knew that it actually didn't prevent transmission," and she was literally talking about herself as if it was like there was a they
Yeah.
that was doing all these things that they should have known better, and it's like the they is you.
You're the day. Well, Paul Offit also just did a podcast where he admitted that we should have never, he was against mandating the vaccine or even recommending it for everybody. And he told that to Anthony Fauci. And he said, hey, Anthony, am I wrong to say we should just have it for elderly people with comorbidities? And Anthony, this is according to Paul Offit. He said, no, Anthony Fauci said, no, you're not wrong. But once you start saying it's just for this group, then it's a garbled message. So we have to say it's for everybody. So, and he said, you're either on the bus or off the bus. So I wanted to be on the bus. And I'm like, so you just lied to everybody. You saw people getting forced to take experimental medical treatment or lose their job. You saw people not being able to go to college. You saw people fighting and hating and dividing, and you just went along with it because you wanted to be on the bus. They're telling on themselves, but no one's ever going to hold them accountable, right? There's no one. I mean, to me, that should be criminal. Deborah Burks, right? She's saying, well, we should have had more early treatments. There were early treatments for COVID, and we didn't push them. We suppressed them. And I'm like, and no one seems to know. She said that on Piers Morgan, right?
Yeah, that's
And
what it was.
and Piers Morgan didn't say, well, does it bother you that you lied? And people, and now pregnant ladies took it. Does it bother you that you're a liar? And that as a medical, you're a public official, medical official, that once you lie, you have no credibility left. How can, when Anthony Fauci he first told the truth about masks, and then he said he lied. The truth was, he said that wearing a mask during a pandemic, it might make you feel better, but it's not really giving you the protection you think it is. He knew that. They knew that.
And you're probably
And
just
it's worse.
getting yourself completely sick with all kinds of other
That's right.
problems because you're touching it.
And that's right. You're touching it and your face all the time. And
It's covered in bacteria.
So, and then he flipped and said, everybody's got to wear a mask. And he said, I lied before. because we didn't have enough masks and I didn't want people running out. So he admits, I'll lie to you when I feel like it. So now how could I ever, that's once you public health official public is outed as a public liar about something as serious as that, how do you retain credibility? You don't, right? And the only reason is because of the propaganda. And they, again, somehow they made it, even though Trump still wants credit for Operation Warp Speed and the vaccine, they still made it out to you're uh, an anti-Trump thing. Like you got, if I'm for the vaccine because I don't like Donald Trump. Well, Donald Trump wants credit for the vaccine. Like they still, it's weird how that's that switcheroo.
One
And
example of that is Marin County, California, as I understand it, went from being the lowest vaccination rates in the country because of concerns about autism and things like that, which, set aside whether that's legitimate or not, for regardless. They went from the lowest vaccination rates in the country to the highest in the country.
yeah,
And just because of what it seems like, just out of politics. It's like, oh, I'm going to change how I treat my kids because of my politics.
well, they, the same people who were like Neil Young, who was doing protests over GMO foods, was then saying, I'm going to take my music off Spotify because Joe Rogan is interviewing doctors who are actually telling you the truth about COVID, right?
Oh, I remember that.
You remember that? Yeah, they took,
my God.
yeah, I'm like, that guy used to, I know, I looked it up. He used to do uh, rallies against GMOs in food, but he's all for mandating you guys take the vaccine and uh, going along with big pharma. People still, it's just how they can't. That's another thing. Lefties were always supposed to be very skeptical of big pharma, right? And no, we know that they're basically a criminal organization, which is what big pharma really is. And they became the biggest defenders of big pharma. It was the weirdest thing.
We're sitting here. It's 2025. The start of the pandemic is now 5 years ago. Why 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 is it still part of your act? Why is it important to still talk about this? Shouldn't we just move on, Jenny?
Yeah.
Like, hey, we learned our lesson. Trump won the election. Isn't it time to move on? MoveOn.org.
People say that to me. They'll say, "Oh, you're still talking about COVID and ivermectin." I'm like, "Yeah, it's the biggest story of my entire life, by far. More people died, and there's excess deaths which aren't being talked about, and people are going to be suffering the effects of that vaccine. Just as Anthony Fauci said, it wouldn't be the first time we had a vaccine that looked good." At first, and then 10 years down the line, 12 years, you're like, oh my God, what have we done? And so I was vaccine injured, and the doctors who treated me, I was treated by Pierre Corey and other doctors. And I asked them, like, so am I out of the woods? They go, well, we really won't know for another, 5 years. And I'm like, oh my God, so, and now there's a Yale study that just came out, and they found out that, and by the guy, the guy the doctor who treated me, uh, Dr. Yo is what I call, that was his moniker, but his last name is hard for me to pronounce. Dr. Yogandana. I don't know. It's hard for me to say. But anyway, he put me in a trial where he gave me ivermectin. That's what happened. I got vaccine injured. I tweeted about it, and I said, hey, it's been 5 weeks since my second jab, and I'm still sick as a dog. I'm exhausted. I have headaches. I have fevers. I have joint pain. Anybody else feeling this, right? Oh, people got mad at me for tweeting that. Like, oh, you're going to make people vaccine hesitant. And I'm like, so this is an experimental medical treatment. You're supposed to, that's how science works. People report that they're, anyway, so he put me in this study, and one of the first drugs was ivermectin, and that's what got me woken up. I said, hey, this is that horse paste. And he's like, no. And he explained it to me.
Yeah.
That if they couldn't get their emergency use authorization, so they had to make hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin off limits, and they had to demonize it. And he said that before COVID, they were looking at ivermectin to cure cancer, which they're back to doing now. And
It's
he
allowed
said,
again. It's
yeah.
back in the Overton window.
Mhm.
It was shoved out, now back.
yeah, and that he said, he explained it to me. It's a Nobel Prize winning drug taken by billions of people, saved billions of lives, and I was like, oh, if they're lying about that, what else are they? Then they're lying about everything, right? And so that's why so people are still, there's lots of people who died, a lot of, they don't count the deaths. if you die within 14 days after you get vaccinated, right? They don't count that as from the vaccine, and it's just it they and the VAERS, which is supposed to record, they knew when they did a study of VAERS, that's supposed to document all the people injured by vaccines. They figured out that it was like less than 10% of the people, I think it's even lower than that, of who are vaccine injured actually report to VAERS, right? And so they knew that wasn't a good system to keep track of all the vaccinated. They've known that since like 2010, and they never decided to update or come up with a new system. But now RFK is talking about doing that. So
It's RFK entering the Trump administration is like maybe the most pointed, maybe him and Tulsi in particular. It's like the most pointed example of this fundamental transformation that's taking place. It's a completely, if you go back in time, even just 5 years ago, the notion that that would be the administration today is, it's like you're just a crazy person.
I mean, people, and I know a lot of people, I think, who have irrational hatred for RFK. I mean, I find his position on Israel-Palestine odious, and I've challenged him on that. I've done videos about it. But in politics, in organizing, one of the fundamental organizing tactic is you organize with people you disagree with vehemently on other things when you coalesce around a common idea. And I know that from being in anti-war organizing. And I remember we did an anti-war rally in Washington, D.C., and Code Pink wasn't going to participate, even though that's their whole point of their organization, because some of the speakers they disagreed with on their LGBTQ stances. And I'm like, yeah, well, this isn't an LGBTQ event, and you're not an LGBTQ organization. You're anti-war, and
But Pink's in the name, Jimmy, so that's kind of like
that's
adjacent, right?
That's not how this works. That's not how organizing works, right? And I gave him the example of Christian Smalls, who started the first union for Amazon on Staten Island. A black guy organized a bunch of Trump voters on Staten Island to start a union, and he didn't. I tell you how he didn't do it. He didn't go to the shop floor and say, "Hey, who here doesn't support LGBTQ? Okay, you're out. Who here is a gun nut? Okay, you're out. Who here agrees with me on immigration? You don't? You're out. Okay, now who's left? Let's organize against the man." That's not how it works. You go, this is the idea. We all have a shared economic interest. Let's organize around that interest. And that's how it works. And so I forget how I got off on this, but
It's the strange bedfellows, but they've gotten so much stranger. One of the things
about RFK.
Yeah, with RFK in particular.
It's amazing, right? Like, I've learned a lot from him. As COVID was an eye opener for me. I thought he was nuts, because that's what all you hear about in the media. I thought he's like, oh, he's this crazy anti-vaxxer. Then you look at the guy was a hero of the environmental movement for his whole life, right? He sued all these chemical companies and won. He sued Big Pharma and won over and over. And, Barack Obama, I found out, it was in 2008, was going to nominate him to be the head of the EPA. That's how fast they switched on him, because he started.
I didn't know that.
Yes. It's a headline in Politico. I saw it. I was like, you're kidding.
Of course.
And so that's how. And then there's videos I've seen of interviews with people like Joe Scarborough saying, yeah, my kid's vaccine injured too. He's autistic because of a vaccine. Talking with RFK Jr. And also Jon Stewart, talking with RFK Jr. about vaccine and kids and autism, and him saying, thank you for doing this. I mean, and then it all flipped, right? And that's just the power of Big Pharma. Why does Big Pharma advertise on cable news? It's not because they're actually trying to sell you those drugs. It's because they want to control the news media. So 70% of the cable news budget comes from Big Pharma. And so, it's just like, why does Boeing sponsor a segment on Meet the Press? Yeah. Why do they have that? Oh, we're going to have our Boeing fact checker. Like, is anybody watching that in the market for a jet? right? No, they're doing that because usually you're supposed to take advertising money, and that funds your investigation, right? So they're taking money from people they're supposed to be investigating and exposing, and so they're not funding their investigations; they're funding their non-investigations, and that's the same thing with big pharma, and that's why there was ubiquitous coverage of COVID, Joe Rogan, ivermectin, the vaccines, lockdown. You weren't allowed. I mean, it was like a totalitarian state. I mean, so the reason why I still talk about COVID is because it's the biggest story of my life, and by far. And also, it's going to happen again right now. The bird flu thing, it's funny how bird flu only affects chickens and cows. Isn't that weird? They're not killing ducks. They're not killing robins or sparrows or geese or seagulls.
Just the food supply.
Just the food supply. Isn't that interesting? Wow. Yeah, that's interesting. And then they're pushing bird flu vaccine. I'm sure Bill Gates has money in that. And then he, also manipulates the media. So people don't know any of that. And isn't he the biggest private farmland owner now? And he's always pushing people to eat fake meat because he's invested in fake meat. I mean, the guy's a megalomaniac, right? And people think he's an altruistic, guy doing philanthropy, but it's somebody coined the term. It's philanthrocapitalism. Every place you look where Bill Gates says he's trying to help people, he's invested in it. And he's got, he invested $50 million in Pfizer before COVID. And then he cashed out, and I think he made like 500. He got a big return. He made 500 million, right? And so as soon as he cashed out, he started on the vaccine. He started saying, yeah, well, it's not infection blocking. There's lots of problems with it. It's not long lasting, doesn't have durability. And we didn't know that at the time the COVID virus had a low fatality rate. It's kind of like the flu, and it only affects old people. That's what he said after he cashed out. And then he said, but the new thing is nasal vaccines where you spray it in, and those are really good. And I looked up, he's invested in the company making those nasal vaccines. And people look at Bill Gates, who, by the way, doesn't even have a college degree. Not only is he not a doctor or a virologist, that's what people tell, Joe Rogan and you're not a doctor. Yeah, neither is Bill. At least I graduated college. Bill Gates didn't. And
I'm not sure if that's actually like a good sign or not that he did or didn't, but
right.
Fair enough.
So anyway, I just can't get over how people think because the news says he's a good guy and he wears a crew neck sweater. When the devil comes, he's not going to have horns and he's going to have a crew neck sweater and glasses.
I think one of the things that has been interesting watching you is you have been willing to look at things that you clearly held to be true and change your mind.
Yeah.
Climate, and I know we only have so much time together. There's so many things we could talk about. I want to stay on this health thing though, because you've sort of become more skeptical of the story about climate change and the idea that we're all going to be dead in 12 years, or I guess now it's 2 years, or who knows.
Well, they keep changing it, right? And we were supposed to, and
there's supposed to be no ice left on the earth. So there's still plenty of ice. There's all kinds of, Obama has beachfront property worth tens of millions of dollars. That's set aside.
After Russiagate and after COVID, I had to take another look at climate change. I'm like, oh, okay. So the same people who lied to me about Russiagate at the top of their lungs, the same people who lied to me about COVID at the top of their lungs, are the same people telling me all this stuff about climate change. So you look into it, and it's just like, well, is are humans burning carbon? Is it increasing the temperature? It may be, but we're on a cooling. Right. It depends on where you start. They start they start all the records from like 1870. It depends on how far back you want to go. Well, if you go back 10,000 years, we're actually in a cooling phase right now.
My wife has talked about this, that we are at the end of this interglacial period heading into an ice age on the basis of these broader cycles for 25 years. Like when we first met, she was talking about we're at the end of an interglacial period. And she's probably right. And it's she's like a college dropout. Why does she know this? But Paul Ehrlich and Al Gore go to WEF.
In private jets. That's the beauty, right? They go in like Bill Gates took a private jet they take private jets to the WEF meetings or Davos, and they all decide that we need to ban gas-powered leaf blowers. It's like, what, you son of a bitch? you're flying to private jets, and then you ask Bill Gates, how do you justify? He goes, well, I buy carbon offsets. It's like, well, either you think it's bad or it's not. Is it increasing climate change by you taking it private? And then he said, remember, he took a private jet to Kenya. And they said, why did you take a private jet to Kenya? Well, I had to learn about Kenya so I could help their farmers. Now he's a horticulturist, I guess. And he does everything, this guy. He's amazing. And
he's a big brain, Jimmy. He's got a huge brain. Bill Gates' brain.
Yeah, he's going there so he can exploit those people and stick vaccines in them. And but he said, I have to learn about the Kenya so I could help their farmers. And it's like, well, if there was just another way that Bill Gates could, I know, maybe if we pitched in and bought him a computer, maybe he could learn about Kenya that way without having to fly there on a private jet. But maybe he's one of those old guys who doesn't know how to use a computer.
So here's the biggest.
The people, let me just make this point.
Yeah, go.
The people who are the loudest voices about climate change, the number one emitter of carbon in the world organization is the U.S. military. We have 800, probably 1,000 military bases around the world because a lot of them are secret. They just built 3 more, a couple in the Philippines. When has Greta Thunberg ever protested outside a new military installation? In fact, she went and she was pro-war with Ukraine when they blew up the Nord Stream pipeline, the biggest emission of methane, which is a big greenhouse causing gas, and that was eco-terrorism. We did that. They never. So when John Kerry calls for the closing, or Al Gore calls for the closing of at least half our military bases around the world, then I'll take them seriously. They never mention that. It's always about you. You have to you have to eat bugs. You have to eat fake meat. You have to live in a 15-minute city. You got to drive a electric scooter. But it's never about, oh yeah, let's go after the number one emitter of carbon. And until they do that, I don't believe them. So, and they're all flying around in private jets. And Barack Obama went to Africa, and I showed his speech. He gave a speech there where he said, everybody here can't have air conditioning in a car, but you can't have that because if you do, the world's going to overheat. And then he took out in a private jet and flew back to his mansion. He's got 3 mansions. How many air conditioners do you think he has in those mansions? I'm going to guess at least 10.
It's central air. It's
10,
it's efficient.
But you need a couple. You can't just... So, so all those guys have these huge mansions with these, multiple air conditioners, multiple beds. So they're all buying oceanside property. If the oceans are really rising, why are they buying beachfront property? All of them are. From Jeff Bezos to Mark Zuckerberg, I talked about this, and Jeff Bezos, he has a 450-foot yacht. Right, Mark Zuckerberg has a 430-foot yacht. That's over 100 feet bigger than a football field. And these are the people, and they has 4 diesel engines on Mark Zuckerberg's yacht, 4 giant, and of course it has an electric stove. But that's the hypocrisy of these people. You can't even keep up. My cynicism can't keep up with their hypocrisy. And so I'm not going to do so I'm like, oh, you know what? I'm not listening to them. I know people who went out and got electric stoves. I know that, And it's funny if everybody...
Electric stoves suck.
They suck.
They are the worst.
They're the worst. So,
Just from a cooking perspective, it's like, why are you doing this to yourself?
So I'm not doing anything they say. Once I found out recycling was a lie. Do you know recycling's a lie, right?
Yeah. There was a great episode of Penn and Teller's bullshit on that.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, it's great. You would like it because it was funny, but it was also just absolutely cut.
It all goes in the same hole. They're not, ever since China decided to stop taking our recyclables, that's it. They just put it, but we still separate it. We still have the blue garbage can and the green garbage can.
You'll get fined if you don't.
Yeah, in some places, yeah, that's right.
So here's my biggest challenge that I want to hear, if this is the only thing we get a chance to dig deep into today, it's the biggest question when I watch your stuff. You will still say that you want government health care.
No, what I say...
Help me understand this, because Well,
Medicare, I tell people my parents were on Medicare, and when they went to the doctor, they didn't go to the government doctor. They went to their private doctor at a private hospital. They went to a private pharmacy.
So single payer.
So, yeah, single payer. So...
But the single payer can decide what it pays for and what it doesn't. And then you're kind of up a creek without a paddle.
Yeah, but at least I have a vote. At least I can vote. I can vote for somebody like Bobby Kennedy, At least I can vote. I don't have a vote with Blue Cross or Aetna or
You can
any,
vote with your feet, though, Jimmy.
but
I mean, you can pick, right? I mean, I know.
No.
Look, I'm not a defender
it's
of
a
the current
monopoly.
system.
Healthcare, health insurance is monopolies, right? And so we don't have choice. And so I want to get the insurance man out from who is a vampire and a parasite, out from in between me and my doctor. I just want to have me and my doctor, and then the government sends a check to the doctor or the hospital or the pharmacy. That's my ideal world, because right now I have a capitalist parasite who skims. How do they make money? They skim. They take a third right off the top, and then the way they make even more money is they deny you service. They deny you health care that your doctor wants to give you, so they can pad. So that's what's in between me and my doctor. Some guy who makes money off of me not getting treatment. That's a bad system. And so the most popular healthcare system in the country still is Medicare. And people, don't want to give up their Medicare. That's for sure. But of course, they're trying to corrupt it, and with Medicare Part D, and trying to bring in insurance companies, which are jacking rates and doing things. So I'm all for single payer. And Australia has a system. It's kind of a hybrid, and they're always listed like in the top 10 healthcare or health systems in the world. And they have like a hybrid. That was what Tulsi was pushing when she ran for president. Yeah. And people lied and said she wasn't for, she's not for universal health care. Yes, she was. She was for the Australian version, which is ranked up and sometimes number 1, sometimes number 5. It's we're ranked like 40th United States healthcare system of rich nations. So anyway,
for life expectancy, for overall life expectancy,
and
right. Yeah.
And so anyway, that's what I'm for. So people
hasn't from the standpoint of COVID, you had the people who are the controllers of the healthcare system just being absolute criminal liars. Isn't it better to not have them be?
They're all criminal. I mean, big pharma, where are you gonna, So I'd rather have the profit motive taken out. So at least that gives me a little bit of a head start. And people say, well, Jimmy, do you want the same people who mandated vaccines to control you? I'm like, yeah. Hey, I don't know if you know, we had mandated vaccines without having single payer health care. So we get all the bad things without any of the good things, right? So we had that. We already had experimental drugs that were forced on us, so you couldn't go to work or you couldn't travel or go to school. So we already have that. So that's not going to get, at least I have a vote. Right. And we voted that people voted out Joe Biden, Kamala Harris. They voted in Donald Trump, Bobby Kennedy. And so that gives me a little bit of control. I have none. I have none with Blue Cross Blue Shield. I have none with Aetna. I don't have any. So
I think that one of the systems that, because I think we need radical change in our system. I'm not a fan of single payer. I'd recommend you check out Switzerland. Of all the systems in the planet, it looks like Switzerland is the one that seems to be maybe the best. It's not single payer.
What's their system?
It is competitive private care, but with a government role. But they have to compete with each other. It isn't like Obamacare made it so that they're all basically the same company with the same prices.
Yeah.
So you don't really get to. I remember when I moved to Texas, it was 2011. I was able to get a Blue Cross plan for my whole family. It was like $355 a month out of pocket. And within 3 years, that plan was discontinued, and the only thing you could get was $1,200. It was 4x more expensive, and had a higher deductible and a narrower, everything about the system seems to be
and then
broken.
When you go to use it, they don't cover the stuff you need anyway. That's what happened to me. I got sick in a unique way. I had a unique bone disease and was undiagnosed for years. They couldn't diagnose, and then finally they did. And then I got, went bankrupt because they wouldn't pay for stuff, and I had a lot of unique things that I needed. And so Yeah, so even if you have health care, I mean, a lot of most of the people who go bankrupt from healthcare have health insurance, right? So, yeah, I say we start the insurance pool at the Atlantic, we end it at Hawaii. That's the insurance pool, and everybody pays in, and everybody gets covered when they get sick. That's what I think we should do. That's my big idea. And do they have? I have to look into Switzerland, but
You
I know
should.
in Australia they have a basic coverage. Everybody gets, if you get sick, you go to the doctor, they take care of you, but then you can buy insurance for like cosmetic things, or if you want to have a private room, things like that.
Yeah.
But everybody pays in and everybody has a basic level of coverage. I think that's what we need.
You were really excited about Bernie Sanders. You worked towards his election the first time around, and you have soured on him. Why?
Well, Bernie Sanders turned out to be a big phony, and he's not. I still support his ideas, and he's good at diagnosing the problem of, but he's also he's a sheepdog for a pro-war, anti-worker party, and he's a liar. He look what he did to RFK when he was trying to get confirmed. Look how he supported the Ukraine war. I mean, he knows that's garbage. I mean, but yeah. So he's not good on lots of things. And when he got cheated in 2016, he had a real movement. He used to start every speech by saying, "Sounds like you're ready for a revolution," and people would go crazy. Well, he stopped saying that. Right, he stopped saying that, and then he extracted nothing for his. He disbanded his movement. He had a real movement, and he could have, extracted concessions from the Democrats, from Hillary Clinton for his support. He extracted nothing. They cheated him. He knew they cheated him. Everybody who supported him knew he got cheated. Elizabeth Warren said that it was a rigged primary. Donna Brazile, who was the DNC chair, said it was a rigged primary in her book. And then everybody said, "Oh, no, it wasn't." So, and then he didn't do anything. He didn't extract. He just went, "Go ahead. Now you got to support all those things I was running against." A warmonger who's in bed with the military-industrial complex and Wall Street. Hillary Clinton. She has a private position and a public position. He told. Now we're supposed to go like, no, you're supposed to be the breathing fire down their neck. You're supposed to tell them they can't get elected without your movement, which they couldn't. And he just was like, "No, I'm not. I didn't." And he did the same thing in 2020. And then, he Russiagated, and which I know he knows is garbage because they Russiagated him. So it's whoever is a threat to the system. Like, you don't have to be a Donald Trump fan to be upset about the intelligence community doing Russiagate. Because if that's what they'll do, they did it to Bernie Sanders. As soon as he started winning primaries, headlines: Putin supports Bernie Sanders, Russia's social media bots supporting Bernie. And they were doing it to him. And he knew it. And then he goes right along with it. So, Bernie Sanders, and then, for him to say, "Vote for Joe," my good friend Joe, and he's just there to give the illusion that there's somebody fighting for you. Chris Hedges I think he made the point. If not, I'll make it, that, we'd be better off if there wasn't people like Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren or AOC or any of those people in the squad elected to government, because then people would get the idea like, "Oh, yeah, they're not coming to help. They're not helping us."
One of the things that is so interesting about the moment we're in with all of this is like, the whole terms like left versus right came out of the French Revolution. It was like, oh, if you were on the left, you were like the Jacobins and like the anti-monarchists. And if you were on the right, you were sort of with the aristocracy and the monarchy. But today it's sort of like the Trump team would be the left. Like they're the closest thing to an insurgent that's trying to take on the entrenched interests. And what we've called the left seem to be in favor of all the things that that Walmart does on Twitter. It's like there's all the same. So has the left and right just completely reversed, or is left and right just stupid and doesn't even make any sense in our politics now to even think in terms of left and right?
I think it's It's confusing to try to think in terms of left and right. Just like I laid out at the beginning of this show, was that the things that the left is supposed to be traditionally about, they're not, right? And the
Yeah.
Democratic Party is now beholden to Wall Street. And as my friend Russell Dobular says, if you're a left party that's in bed with Wall Street, there's no point to you, which is why they have to push identity politics, because that's all they have left. And identity politics doesn't come from the bottom up, it comes from the top down. And why? As Christian Parenti explained to me on my show, son of Michael Parenti, they've been doing this since World War II. It's the NGOs like the Ford Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, work hand in hand with the deep state to make sure that social movements don't have an economic component to them, right? So when did they, and so that's why they push identity politics. That's why the deep state pushed feminism. Yeah. What's her name? The big feminist. Now I'm blanking on her name. Doesn't matter.
Jane Fonda.
No, the
Which I guess you
Gloria Gloria Steinem.
Oh, right.
Said she was at CIA, and so that's the game. The game is that that's when did they kill Martin Luther King? Not when he was desegregating lunch counters, because that makes everybody money. And but it was when he was doing a poor people's march, when he turned against the Vietnam War, and he wasn't doing a poor black people's march. He was doing a poor people's march. Same thing with Malcolm X. When he realized that it wasn't a black white thing, that's when they got rid of him. So that's what it's always those. That's where identity politics comes from. They want you to identify with your sexuality. They want the most important thing about you to be your skin color or your ethnicity or your race, and that's a mistake. And that's there to make sure people don't come together and divide people. And it comes from people like BlackRock. There's videos I've showed of Larry Fink saying we have to force DEI on corporations. We have to force it on them, and that's coming from the top down. And that's to keep the workers divided, and so they don't come together So it's not. You're right. It's not left right. It's the top down. It's us against them. It's workers against the oligarchs. And that's what I say at the end of my show, my stand-up show. It isn't left right anymore, because people can't tell me what left right means anymore. So you got RFK Jr. in there going after corruption in the FDA and the CDC, and going to clean up the food supplies, go after big agra. You got Trump and stopping a war and wanting to make friends with Russia and China, and floating the idea of cutting our military by 50%.
That was the biggest overlooked statement in the past several weeks. It was sort of shocking that this was said
by the president
in the Oval Office.
That sounds like something that you would think Bernie Sanders would say. Of course, he would never say it, because he's also afraid of the military-industrial complex and the deep state, and he does their bidding. And so, but there it is. And so that's why, it does. So, RFK said that there's been, he knows more about this than me, but there's been 4 different political realignments in our nation's history politically. He said we're in the middle of one, and there's certainly something's happening. Glenn Greenwald talks about a realignment, and that and then the people who don't see it are the dumbest people around. And I'm like, well, I do see that. Donald. When you see how hard the establishment was against Donald Trump, and how hard the establishment was against Tulsi Gabbard, and how hard they were against Kash Patel, and how hard they were in unison. Never Trumper Republicans and all the Democrats and the media, and they're against RFK. They're like, oh, well, how could you? There's got to be something good about them, at the very least. If it's like the enemy of my enemy is my friend, right? So,
especially when it's such a diverse group, it's not like it's an ideological monoculture in that group. You're talking about a wide range of views in just the people you just listed.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, so. That's my message. My message is it's not left right anymore. It's us against them. It's populists against oligarchy. And Trump is, there's, again, a lot of things I disagree with him on, and I hope he doesn't cut Medicare. I hope his cuts to Medicaid make sense, and they don't take a meat cleaver to it, as Steve Bannon said. And, I hope he lives up to his promises. about protecting Medicare and Social Security, and not taxing Social Security. I mean, all those things, like he's not going to tax tipped wages, he's not going to tax overtime, he's going to protect Social Security. I mean, he sounds like a progressive lefty a lot of times. I mean, Joe Biden. I mean, remember Joe Biden ran on the public option, and then they never brought it up again. That was it.
It was actually really shocking to me that healthcare, like the healthcare system, played no role in our politics in the aftermath of a pandemic that basically introduced like communist totalitarianism in America.
Yeah.
And it was not talked about until the CEO of United Healthcare got shot.
That's right.
And only briefly, except in like,
yeah, and then
Reddit.
you're not supposed to, shouldn't be celebrating this. I'm like, oh, I already bought a float. But
I'm not saying I supported that, but I mean, it is interesting that did bring the conversation in. It's actually it's tragic that that's what it took to bring the conversation even temporarily back.
It was very temporary. It's over. Yeah, like I don't know how people could be against a public option. I'm like, okay, because
we can go next time you come in, we have more time. Like we can go longer on that.
I mean, public option is that you get to decide if you want to buy into Medicare. You get to decide, and then we'll let people decide. How could you be against that? You're a libertarian, right? You got people get choice. So
it's called the ratchet effect. It's each edition gets locked into place, and then the next one gets locked into place. It's like, it's how the deep state got to be what it is, right? When I first came into this world of like thinking about politics in a big way, it was through Ron Paul. And specifically, I remember the moment he was on stage at it was like the 2007 primaries, and he talked about 9/11 and how it was CIA blowback for our role overseas. And Rudy Giuliani was like, how dare you? And came at him really hard.
Yeah.
And up until that point, I was more or less, like a relatively uneducated, like conservative Republican. Like it just was like, but there was something about that moment that struck and opened up a door to the possibility that everything I'd been told about our role, especially after the fall of the Berlin Wall, has been not what I've been told.
Yeah,
and I think that's the area where I've like found your show to be the most like enriching. Like you explode what's going on the international stage. How do you know how do you have confidence in what you're reading about? That's my biggest question for you, because we don't have time to go into all the details, and I encourage everyone to like go subscribe to your channel, because it's like you're like a great source for everything happening on the warfare state front. But how do you know that?
I just have a good bullshit detector. Like I knew immediately that Russiagate wasn't right. I'm like, and I brought on Bill Binney, and the big thing was that they said Russia had hacked into the DNC server, and I'm like, well, wait, the FBI didn't inspect the server. They gave it to CrowdStrike, which is that I'm like, when has the FBI ever farmed out an investigation about something this important? That's not so. Right away, my spidey senses, right? And then I brought on Bill Binney, who's the top code breaker for the NSA, and the FBI tried to entrap him, and he's so smart he outsmarted them. And he came on and he said, no, if this was hacked by the Russians, there would be evidence of it. They can't hide it, and it's not there. That if that evidence existed, they would show it to us. And he said the reason why they're not showing it to us is because it doesn't exist. And he said that he looked it up anyway. So I knew. So then I got that, and so then once you get that, you're like, oh, so then you just see it through a different lens. Everything, like, oh, you see where they're lying about all of it, right? And how it's all made up. The FBI lied to the FISA court 17 times so they could get a tap on Donald Trump's phone, so they could get some dirt on him to impeach him. And nobody knows that. Nobody knows that they did that. And that if they can do that to Donald Trump, they can do that to anybody who's a threat to the establishment. So somebody in the establishment sees him as a threat. So that's, and then like with the Syrian gas attacks, right? So I'm like, this doesn't make sense. At the time, Assad was winning the war. And why would he use gas? The one thing that Barack Obama said, if he did that, we'd have to, And so, of course, there was a false flag, and it was obvious the reporters on the. It wasn't easy. It wasn't hard. Once you realize that they're lying, that's my jumping off point, is that the government is lying. Now I just have to figure out where, and then it becomes obvious very quickly, often, where they're lying.
Is there a way that you recommend people like check their priors? Because as you're trying to grapple with this world of information we're in, like that's the thing that's so interesting to me, is like I am completely with you. Like I don't trust anything that is the received wisdom, is the talking point, that everybody on like the old like regime media is saying. They use the same words. It's always like, I remember, what was that? Was it during COVID when they had all the local news stations read the same script?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then there was somebody compiled them all and just sort of did like a Brady Bunch video of them all sounding like robots.
Yes.
Have you ever gone down a road that your nose said, this doesn't smell right, and then found yourself in a place where you're like, I'm in the wrong. I went down a dead end here. This is not. It's not what they said, but it wasn't this either, and I'm not sure where to go from here.
No, I haven't experienced that. I was right about Russiagate. I was right about the hacking the DNC server. I was right about Seth Rich. I was right about, that's amazing. When you're not allowed to ask a question about something, that's when you know that you're onto something and they're hiding something. And, I was smeared immediately just for asking normal questions about, I remember I was on a panel at the Young Turks with Cenk Uygur, Ben Mankiewicz, and they're talking about Seth Rich, and I had they just did a hit piece on me for
and remind me in the audience like who Seth Rich was.
So Seth Rich was a guy who worked for the DNC, and it's been theorized that he was the one who leaked those emails and to WikiLeaks that outed all the malfeasance in the DNC, and it wasn't Russia that hacked it, that he downloaded onto a thumbnail and he gave it. And so that's what a lot of people, and the reason why was because he found out that they're cheating, and he's this guy who's a progressive minded guy, and so he got killed. And there's all these questions around. It's very, very murky about how he was killed. Then they said, it was a botched robbery. You know why they said it was a botched robbery? Because they didn't take anything. They didn't take his wallet. They didn't take his watch. They didn't take his cell phone. They didn't take anything.
Sounds more like a successful assassination.
Yeah, that's right.
And a botched robbery. It's like, oh, okay.
And so then the FBI lied about, like, well, where's his laptop? And the FBI's like, we don't know where it is. And then, of course, they found out they did know where it was. And then they said, well, we can't get into it. Of course, they could get in. They're like, okay, we could get into it, but we can't share it with you because it would, and all this. And so they've been ordered by a court twice to release the contents of Seth Rich's laptop, and the FBI just refuses. So now with Kash Patel in there, maybe we'll find out. But back to my point, I was on a panel, and I said, I had questions like, hey, where was he from the time he left the bar that night to the time he got to his house? There was like hours, and nobody knows where he was. And so they're just normal questions that a reporter, and I said, hey, can anybody remember the last time you weren't allowed to ask normal questions about an unsolved murder? And they're like, oh, I don't. You never looked at it like that, right? Just like, you better bad person asking questions about Seth Rich's murder. You're bad. You've got to protect his family. That's such a bullshit lie. Nobody cares about and so reporters are supposed to ask questions about unsolved murder investigations. So, I was right about that. And then, of course, just one thing after another. Ukraine, it was obvious. Nobody knows the history. Nobody knows that we overthrew their government in 2014, and that we immediately started training their military, and that we installed puppets, and that the people of Ukraine actually want peace with Russia. They voted for Zelensky and this is all NATO. This was a proxy war by the United States. We did, and again, same thing with Nord Stream. But it was and then January 6th, it's like all of it. It's just so obvious if you're looking for it. And once I saw behind the curtain, I can't unsee it. And it's not hard. If I can do it, it's not hard.
It felt like,
that's my thing.
It felt like the same.
the moment I had on this front, which was similar, was, and I went back and looked at these Facebook posts at the very beginning. The earliest one I think I found was maybe March 2020. That it was obvious that the COVID story was broken. Like we knew, I think like Jay Bhattacharya was already revealing that the denominator in the death rate was probably like 100 times what they were saying. So it wasn't 3% fatality rate. It was like 0.03%. And it wasn't like I was on the dark web to find this stuff. It was like you just had to look and pay attention to a couple of different people. Do you think that we're heading towards a better world where more people, we don't just have the Walter Cronkite 3 networks now. Like we have the ability, if you're motivated like you are, to get educated about things and to have more sources? Or do you think there's something else going on that's making it maybe even harder in a way or more confusing? Like how do you think about the landscape for trying to know what the truth is?
Well, I mean, again, I just follow my gut, and I can see I'm pretty good at sniffing out BS. And, I have sources that I trust, people like Glenn Greenwald, people like Aaron Matei and Max Blumenthal. And so there's, Matt Taibbi, Schellenberger. There's lots of people who know how to break through the noise and see the truth. So, but I YouTube, people like me became a competitor to people like the New York Times, Washington Post, CNN, and MSNBC, and so they came at us, and that's right in the USAID playbook is you go after their advertisers, and so they did. They wrote hit pieces about how people on YouTube are being radicalized by people like me, and they put me in
the path to the far right.
Yeah, the path. That's right. And.
Bernie Sanders' single payer lover is path to far right.
Yeah, that's right. So exactly. And they put you in articles with Nazis and pedophiles, and so they get advertisers scared. So once you're in the middle of a story like that, you're like, oh, I see how this works, right? There really is an establishment. There really is a handful of billionaires that own all the media, and they really are manufacturing consent. And this is all about that. That's how they move the narrative, and so. Yeah, I mean, that's how I look at things. It's not left or right. It's us against them. It's a handful of billionaires that actually run everything. And, I think it's too early in Trump's term to really tell. I think how could you be against transparency? And people are like, oh, Elon Musk is going to have access to your Social Security. Like, yeah, he's unelected. Yeah, I just want the unelected people who already have access to it to have access. What's he going to do? Take my credit card and take my Social Security number and open a credit card so he can go to Europe? Like what?
I was thinking about this because a friend of mine is very worried about like, oh, Elon. He's like, you should be more worried about what Elon having access to these things. And
what?
Well, yeah, I was thinking about this. Well, let me think. There's already like giant private repositories of like of everyone's information possible already.
Edward Snowden revealed that we live in a surveillance state. What do you think? Who do you think? People like John, Clapper and Brennan and and Comey, those people all have access to everything. They have it, right? So you don't have privacy anymore. Like. They're collecting all your emails, all your texts. They got it. It's just again, they don't have, his intentions. What is his intention? Well, we'll know him by his fruit. That's why I say, well, right now, I think it's great that they're dismantling the NED, which is just a CIA front. Same thing with USAID. It's just a CIA front. It's for imperialism. It's for the United States to try to throw, what they mostly do is overthrow democratically elected governments and democracies and install strongmen. And that's what the United States economic hitmen like to do. It's the exact opposite of democracy building.
Well, I've been trying to think about this because there's a part of me that's agrees with all your criticisms and is saddened because it's like, well, what of America? I love America. I love the founding principles. I love the Constitution. I mean, what do you love of America? What gets you up in the morning to want to fight for for the values in the country?
Well,
Because you're an acerbic critic, a funny one, but an acerbic one. So is there a light at the end of the tunnel?
well, I love the people. I mean, I love Americans. I travel all over the country all the time doing comedy, and I meet these people from all political stripes. And, I think Americans are basically great people who are hardworking, and they just want a fair deal. And so, yeah, I mean, that's what I love. I love the Bill of Rights.
Yeah.
I love the First Amendment. Second Amendment, I wasn't so hot on until
Kind of need it for the first. Just ask, ask the
that's
Germans.
That's one of those things I've been, evolving on. It's like, I remember I had a guy on my show who was a Boogaloo Boy, and he talked about how these people came for him, and he called the cops, and the cops didn't show up. They're outside his house for an hour, and he said, "That's why I have a gun now." And I was like, "All right." And then it happened to me.
Really?
Yeah. So
Wait, can you elaborate on this?
in my old house when I used to live in Pasadena, I got a call from Joe Rogan, and he's like, "Hey, my security guy said there's a guy here, and he's looking for you, and they think he has a gun, and he seemed like he was on meth or something." And I said, "What kind of a car does he drive?" He's like, "Oh, he's driving like a blue pickup." And I looked outside my front window, and there it was. And I was like, "Oh." So I called the cops immediately. And I have this hilarious conversation where I'm trying to explain to them who Joe Rogan is. And I'm like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. This guy called me and he tells me, I'm trying to explain why this is credible.
Yeah, yeah.
And so finally I'm like, there's a guy like, well, did you see the gun? And I'm like, no, I told the security guy at Joe Rogan. So who's Joe Rogan? It was just one of those conversations. So like, okay, we'll send a car. They didn't send a car for an hour. And I'm like, You gotta be kidding me. Look, what else? What are the cops doing in Pasadena at 3:00 in the afternoon, right? In Pasadena. Took an hour to get a freaking car at my house. And so I mean, I still don't own a gun because I know I'll use it. And that's frightens me. So now I do have bear mace. I do have bear mace.
One of the things that's interesting, this is the most radical way to think about this is, in one sense, is look at Afghanistan. The two great empires of the modern era couldn't ultimately win against guys with old guns and old Toyota trucks.
They live there. They're not leaving. They're going to wait you out. I mean, they're not. And it was always the case. And as Julian Assange taught us, that war was not meant to be won. That war was meant to be ongoing. Just like same thing with the Ukraine war. It's not meant to be won. It's meant to be ongoing. And that's what Joe Biden wanted. He wanted to fund that war to 2029. I mean, they want to keep it going because it's just money funneling. That's what the military-industrial complex. Eisenhower wasn't kidding when he said, "Beware the undue influence of the military-industrial complex," and that's who's been running our foreign policy. And it's all about an upward transfer of wealth from the Treasury to the international security state, the military-industrial complex. And that's why when Joe Biden was pulling us out of Afghanistan and leaving all the equipment behind. Why do you do that? You leave all the equipment behind because then you got to order new equipment. That's why. And then you get big contracts. And those are the people pulling the strings. And I said, well, people were giving him credit for, he's ending the Afghanistan war. Look what a good guy. And I said, he hasn't said what he's going to do with the money that we've been spending in Afghanistan. I want to hear what he said because my feeling is they have another war in the chamber. And they did, the Ukraine war. So as soon as they stopped Afghanistan, they started the Ukraine war, and there it was.
I'm trying to remember who said war is the health of the state, but it is definitely the case. It seems like the question of war and peace is the biggest of the political questions. It's the thing that shapes. It's like history. It's all of history. It's like it is the issue that ultimately frames all the other issues. And it's interesting that doesn't usually tend to be the case with like American politics. It's just because we're separated by oceans. So we're just protected and we don't think about it the same way. Like, why do you think that just rolls along, and the public goes along and doesn't really
I think because they
engage.
consolidated the media in 1996 with Bill Clinton, right? When they did the Telecommunications Act, which took us from 50 giant news media companies, they were already giant. Now with their even bigger 6 companies, some say 5. So they control the narrative. It's all, look at COVID. It was all about narrative control. And look at Russiagate. I mean, people still believe in it, right? Even after the Mueller report. Swipe Chuck Todd just tweeted out, people should read this. And just the Mueller report. Yeah, the Mueller report where he said there's no evidence of collusion between Donald Trump's administration, organization, political machine, and Russia. There's no evidence. You mean that one? And so that's why I think people aren't more upset about or more in tune with the war machine and what it means, And somebody said, smarter than me, that, whatever we do overseas, we're eventually going to do to ourselves. And of course we do. We do that. Now we have militarized police. We're now censoring ourselves. The government's now funding media organizations to do propaganda on our own American citizens. I had it done to me. They sponsored, that's a big thing for USAID. They sponsor these fake media organizations, which are just propaganda arms of the economic hitmen in the United States. And one of them was called Vox Media Ukraine. And they would do videos and articles because I was telling the truth about Ukraine, and they were trying to discredit me. And they were saying that, Jimmy Dore is a conspiracy theorist and a liar and a this and a that.
You're a Russian plant.
I'm a Russian plant.
You're doing Russian
propaganda.
Points.
Yeah, so if Vladimir Putin said 2 + 2 = 4, and I said that's right, they'd say, oh, why are you repeating Russian propaganda? I'm just saying something that's true. Putin also happens to be saying something that's true. I'm not saying it because he's saying it. I'm saying it because it's the truth. And so I forget what the question was.
Well, I think one of the things that's interesting at this moment now is, like, for me personally, is I'm probably most skeptical of, like, my opinions when it comes to foreign policy, whether it's Ukraine or otherwise, just because I can only know what I'm hearing, and I have only so much time. I feel like most of us feel that way, and so
what are you unclear about? I'll help you.
No, okay. With Ukraine, Jeffrey Sachs's fundamental story strikes me as being correct.
Yes.
That,
of course,
that we've got this march that starts with the expansion of NATO.
NATO, that's right.
That was fundamentally a violation of the agreements that were part of the end of the Soviet Union. So more or less everything about that seems right, or at least seems like plausible and more coherent than the advocates for this is great and we're going to win. Like the notion that, oh no, we're going to support Ukraine and they'll win. How is that possible?
It's not possible.
So then right away you're in like, well, what are we talking about here? And we're 3 years into it.
Again,
that
war's not...
Yeah, it's a meat grinder. So now Donald Trump is like waving the white flag. It's like, well, why didn't you win though? You had 3 years to win.
Yeah.
So it's not even that it's just, there's still I guess it's true of everything. Maybe it's not just foreign policy. I just try to not let myself get too caught up in the story I think I know. Just in case. There's something else. There's some other angle.
The story I know is not the story being told in the establishment press, the corporate news media, which is what gives me confidence that it's the real one, right? They don't bring Jeffrey Sachs on Meet the Press. They don't bring on Mersheimer, right? They don't bring on Aaron Mate or Glenn Greenwald, right? And so
no.
So that's how you know that's the real, and it's obvious. I mean, it's just obvious. I mean, everybody from Henry Kissinger to Noam Chomsky and everybody in between said, don't do this. Don't poke the bear with Ukraine. And the last thing you want to do is push them closer to China, which they did. The Biden neocons, which is what they are, did everything they shouldn't have done. And they're balkanizing. Right now they're selling off half the farmland in Ukraine's already been sold off. BlackRock's coming in. They're going to rebuild it. They're going to own it. They thought they could do the same thing to Russia. They thought Russia was going to be weaker than it actually was. Russia's now stronger than it was before the war. And
I was at this ARC conference last week, and Eric Prince of BlackRock, the not the investment firm, the military contractor. He said this. He said,
Blackwater?
or Blackwater, that's what it is, Blackwater. He said Russia's ability to respond has actually increased as a result of the conflict, that they've adapted to the modern warfare and to the use of drones and all. So the notion that the strategic objective was let's weaken Russia, whose economy is like the size of Spain. So that's the other part I don't understand about the narrative. It's like, oh, it's Xi and Putin. It's like, well, Xi's got, that's like 100x the size of from an economy and a like industrial capacity. Why is Putin, just because they have nuclear weapons? Like, how do you understand the way these get grouped? Like, oh, it's Iran and Putin and Xi, but Iran and Russia are like pipsqueaks in comparison. It doesn't. I don't get it.
Right. Yeah.
I don't get that combo exactly. Like the new axis of evil.
Yeah, well, that's what they said about the Iraq War. It was like, oh, what we learned was we can invade, we can do that, we can go into a middle, and Russia's not going to do anything about it. And so that's why they went after Syria, and that was because that was also over a pipeline. It was also over Israel wanted to do the Greater Israel Project. It was also Turkey wanted a part of it, but it had to do with the pipeline coming from Qatar or Saudi Arabia and to bring energy. And they were like, no, we don't want that kind of competition. And they wanted it to go through Syria, and Russia's like, fuck you, I don't want that. We don't want that. And so that's what that really was all about. 'Cause that's why, Syria was like a client state of Russia and Iran. And so the thing is, the thing that confuses me is I don't understand why Europe is so compliant and why they just went along with NATO, why they just went along with the United States, and that they don't stand up for themselves at all. And it's like that's Ukraine war has been so bad. When they blew up the Nord Stream pipeline, that wrecked Germany. They're spending 2-3 times for the price for energy, and now we're the one providing the liquefied natural gas to them. And it's just so corrupt. It's so obvious what's happening, and I just can't believe there aren't more politicians standing up. And anybody who does stand up and say we want peace in Ukraine, and I don't want that, we want to have friendly relations with Russia and get our energy from them again. They're called far right. They're called extremists.
One of the things that
and they're assassinated.
It's so dark.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things about President Trump that I think he means, and he has said all along, is it's pretty rare in a sense. He talks about the human meat grinder of this thing.
Yeah.
Like that is the place where he starts.
Yeah.
He doesn't talk about the geopolitical positioning and the great powers game of Risk.
Right.
He's like, this is horrible. There are hundreds of thousands of human beings being butchered.
They're just cannon fodder
and
for economic proxy war.
It's like another example of this political inversion that I guess I just wonder if do you think it lasts? Do you think that this is like a real like pivot in our politics beyond him?
I hope it is, I hope I hope Donald Trump turns out to be the non-interventionist that he claims to be. I hope he doesn't start a war with Iran at the behest of Israel. I hope he doesn't do an ethnic cleansing but I hope he does make friendly relations with China and Russia. I hope he does end the Ukraine war, which it looks like that is happening. That is going to happen. And so I'm like Glenn Greenwald. I share an optimism, and we'll have to wait and see. We'll know them by their fruit. But I haven't seen this opportunity for non-interventionism in my lifetime. They're all freaking crazy warmongers. So Donald Trump seems to be right, that he's not that. And I think that's why he was so vehemently opposed by the deep state, right? Because he was, we know they lied about the troop levels in Syria to him. They lied to him when he said, hey, I want to pull the troops out. And they're like, oh, we got a lot. We don't have any, and they were lying. And so, and Miley also committed treason. But So we'll see. We'll again, fingers crossed. I mean, there's good parts. I mean, he certainly ramped up the drone war when he was president the first time, and so
Like in Yemen and places like that.
and if he doesn't handle this Israel thing right, they're going to start a world war. That's my big fear, right?
As we wrap up, what do you see as the most likely path to being like a legitimate alternative to the new Republicans? Because right now the Democrats seem like a bus on fire in a ditch, in a dumpster. Like it just, I don't know why they even exist. Like as a meaningful political enterprise, like they don't have a vision that seems to. There's not one thing that they are stand for.
So like I said earlier, there's no point to a left party that's in bed with Wall Street. There's just no point, and the military-industrial complex, which they are. So now we have what people used to refer to as two right-wing parties, right? Now, I don't even, again, the only anti-war people around are people in the Republican Party. So are they right-wing? Are they left-wing now because they're anti-war? Is Thomas Massey and Rand Paul, are they left-wing now? So again, those terms, but
even just as an alternative, just so we have something like competition in our politics.
I mean, and they know how to make sure there isn't. They know how to make sure that there is a uniparty. Trump was a threat to the uniparty, the establishment Republicans and the establishment Democrats against him. And so, I mean, he would be, I guess, you could consider that. Maybe some people would consider that a third party, right? It's certainly, but he's so popular right now that he can, he can bully the Republican Party and threaten to primary people and stuff like that. And Elon Musk is doing this same thing. So
he got every one of his nominations, which was kind of amazing.
Maybe he can transform the Republican Party. Maybe that happens. But he's a billionaire. Elon Musk is the richest guy in the world. How much transformation is really going to happen? What I say, how you get to be a billionaire? By helping people. And so, I mean, these guys are crushers. And so do they, nobody's talking about giving people a better functioning healthcare system, although RFK is talking about cleaning up the corruption and things like that, which is great, and cleaning up our food supply and finding out what's the cause of our chronic illnesses and the obesity epidemic. And so that's all that, but that's not a healthcare system, right? And so nobody, Trump, when he ran the first time, when he was running in 2020, he was like, I'm going to give everybody health care. How are you going to do it? I'm going to I know how to talk to the hospitals. And then, he didn't have a plan. He still doesn't have a plan, and nobody has a plan.
It's like a buzzsaw that I don't know what will cause fundamental change in it. Maybe we'll see it in our lifetime. Switzerland, I'm telling you.
I'm saying public option. And there's no good argument against the public option. And I mean, your ratchet effect one is, I don't think that's very strong. And because you're just giving people choice. You can't be against giving people choice. No one's saying take away private health insurance. And if private insurance works so well, why would it ever go away? And why would people not want it?
We'll save the full-throated version of this for another time, Jimmy. I love you. I learn from you every week.
Oh, that's very sweet of you to say. Thank you very much.
I don't always agree, but I always feel enriched, even though you're just a jag-off comedian, as you like to say.
Well, my whole thing was I was always a C student, and I'm just a nightclub comedian. If I can see through this stuff, the people on TV who are supposed to see through it, they must also. You don't think that Chris Hayes and Rachel Maddow and Anderson Cooper know Russiagate was made up by the Clinton campaign and pushed by the FBI, and the Steele dossier was just opposition research paid for by the Clinton campaign? We all know all this stuff now.
It was really crazy to watch the like willful gaslighting. It is a function of sheer ignorance and that people would buy any of that. It's just like it was all there. You could see it. It's like the Hunter Biden laptop. It's like
just like that.
It's like, well, this was why is he on the board of Burisma? How is that not the most corrupt thing in the history of American politics? Like all of it was just so nuts. I know you've got to get going. I ask this question of every guest. The show's called Dad Saves America because from a positive perspective, I think that's one of the roles we as men can play in our lives that actually leads to a better future. Like if you're a man and you you get to be a father, that's probably going to be the most important role you play, or one of them.
I'm not a father. I'm barren.
Well, given that, how do you think about your role in the American story?
Oh boy. I hope it is. I hope it's one of bringing people together and waking people up from party politics. That's what, I've had people some of my old friends who are Democrats say, oh, you have, your job is you're turning Democrats into Republicans. And I'm like, that's not what I'm doing. I have just as many Republicans say, hey, thanks for helping me see through things. And I, didn't think of it this way until I watched your show. So my thing is that I really want to stop hating your neighbor. Your neighbor's not your enemy. Your neighbor is living through the same thing you're living through. You guys have the same enemies. They want you to think you're each other's enemy, and you're not. You're all so come together along class lines. So that's what I hope my legacy is that I kind of woke people up from identity divisive politics and made them realize their commonality and bringing people together.
Jimmy Dore, thanks for being on Dad Saves America.
Okay, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.